Good morning, everybody. Can you all hear me okay, yeah? Okay. I'd like to remind members that this meeting is being webcast live, so please remain seated when you are called to speak, and remember to turn off your microphone when you've finished speaking. I'd also like to request you switch off your mobile phones or set them to silent if you can't turn them off. We are limiting to one question per party, as per usual. I don't think there's any apologies from the Cabinet today, no? Okay. Are there any declarations of interest? No, can't see any. Okay. And we've got no one that's registered to speak today either. So if we move on to item agenda number 3, which is confirmation of minutes. Can I just ask everyone to confirm that because I wasn't present at the last Cabinet meeting? Agreed? Okay. Okay, we'll move straight on then to agenda item number 4, which is the Section 25 report for 2026-2027. So I invite Councillor Wharton to move the recommendation, please.
I move the recommendation.
Okay, and I will be seconding that. So Councillor Wharton, if you can take us through that.
Good morning all. I've just thank you. The Section 25 statement has been updated since the 5th of February Cabinet meeting because there were a number of items that we were unaware of at the time, and they were the final local government settlement, which was announced on the 9th of February, and then the outcome of our application for exceptional financial support and flexibility on council tax, which was being received by the government as part of the local government finance settlement, and the government's response to the crisis in SEND and how to deal with the massive deficits that we're incurring across the country, and Worcestershire has those as well. So the report's been updated to take account of those factors in terms of that, so it's got the local context of where we are. And I think just to draw members' attention, when we're setting the budget, Section 25 of the Local Government Act 2003 requires that I have to put an opinion on the robustness of the estimates and the adequacy of the reserves going forward. So that's a statutory duty that I have to comply with. So that report gives you the synopsis of where the organisation is. So the only major change to the report in terms of that was Cabinet considered on the 5th of February is in paragraph 50 regarding the SEND deficits now. So in terms of that, and I'll come on to that in the next report, is that the County Council will continue to apply the statutory override until March 28, and the Council will focus as a priority at pace to reduce the high needs deficit via the high needs management plan and try and set aside reserves required by the end of March 28 when the deficit crystallises. And we would all be aware that the government has announced a high needs stability grant, which is good news, that covers 90% of that deficit. However, the 10% of that deficit still equates to a significant sum of money, which will end up by March 28 around circa 43.7 million if the deficit plan doesn't impact on that. So we'll have to set aside funds for that at a point in time. So that's still a big issue for the County Council. I think I won't go going through the detail of the report. It's got adequacy of the reserves, my statement and my opinion in terms of that, updated for that. And my opinion is we've been offered council tax flexibility by the government. I suggest that my advice is that we do take that, because that's a recurrent 14.4 million for next year, and over the MTFP period is 43.7 million. And obviously from conversations with MHCLG and other local authorities, no council has ever refused to take that flexibility, but that's my advice, but that decision will be for members to decide. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I have nothing to add to that. That's very clear and sound advice, and thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Wharton. Do we have any Cabinet members that would like to add anything or speak on that at all? No? Okay, do we have any other councillors that wish to ask a question? Councillor Kent?
Thank you very much. And it's probably a question that I could address to Phil Rook. I've just got the one, haven't I? Is it just one per party now, or is it one per councillor? Sorry, Councillor Munger.
Well, I'd say one per party. although there's only a couple of you from the Tories, isn't there? So you can have one question each today. Thank you.
That's very kind of you. Thank you for your generosity. I'm sure my colleague next to me will be really pleased. There's three, actually, because Dan's here as well, so sorry. 57F, Strategic Directors reviewed and agreed their proposed budgets for 26-27 and confirming that they will work collaboratively together with the support of the Finance Service to deliver their services within their allocated cash budget. Could I just ask perhaps Councillor Wharton or Phil, what went wrong this year?
Thank you, Councillor Kent. I'll defer to Councillor Recock and Councillor Bowen to ask that specific question, because I think you've asked it a number of times before.
I'm not sure what the point in the question is. I can tell you how it's really going in children's services. Organisational savings this year of over £5.5 million already delivered. Statutory cost avoidance, latest figure in with 1 month still to go, of nearly £12 million, which is a third more than the Conservatives managed in the whole of last year. We've managed a full restructuring of the fostering service and introduced a transformation plan which in just a few months has already more than paid for itself. If we want to talk about the reasons for overspending, it's very simple in children's services. I've said it before and I'll say it again. In 2020, we were able to look after 193 children ourselves in-house. Under the Tories, that fell to 113. They subcontracted the care of children we should have been looking after over the last 5 years, so that in residential care, the number of children in 2020, which was 87, went up to 167 in 2025. We are now paying to those private companies who the Conservatives subcontracted their care to more than £60 million every year. That's the mess they've left, and yet the Conservatives sit here wondering where it all went wrong. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen, and I do think that the same reflection on adults is the same. Is that correct, Councillor Recock?
Thank you, Chair. Well, we had the rise in the national minimum wage, national insurance, and nationally it was 623 million overspend this year.
Thank you. Have we got any further questions by any other councillors?
Could I just come back? Because I don't think my question has been answered. I would just like to ask.
This isn't a question and answers debate. That's Thursday.
But it is
full
exactly
council.
that. We're asking questions on the cabinet paper.
Councillor
I'm
Kent,
being
this
very
is not,
polite,
and I've
to be honest.
requested
I just wanted
one.
to
No, you've asked
understand
one question.
how.
Councillor Kent, you've had your one question. Thank you. Is there anybody else? Councillor Birch or Councillor Miller? Councillor Bales? No. Thank you. We'll move on. So have we got any more councillors on our cabinet wishes to speak? I'll move forward with the proposal then. Do we all agree on that? Agreed. Okay. That motion is carried. Thank you. So now we move on to item agenda number 5, the updated 26-27 proposed budget and medium-term plan. So I do believe that we have Councillor Wharton who's going to move that recommendation. Is that correct?
Yeah, I move, excuse me, I move the recommendations 1A to G and 2A to K in the report.
Okay, and I formally second that also. Okay, do you invite anybody to speak for you, Rob?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Phil Rook to speak before I do on this one.
Thank you, Rob. I'll just touch on some of the changes since the final settlement on the 5th of, which was announced on the 9th of February in terms of that. So members will be aware that we've been working very hard with Society County Treasurers and CCN, and there was a change in the final settlement in terms of that. So the government put in a recovery grant that was an extra 440 million. Worcestershire didn't receive any of that from the government, so that was very disappointing in terms of that respect. There was an error in the formula from the government that we picked up in terms of pooling, so the baselines were for business rates pooling, so that was effectively, the money went to district councils, so we lobbied in terms of the government, so we had a little bit of extra money in terms of that. For us it was about 1.3 million, and the government put in an extra what's called an adjustment support grant, which is about 116 million nationally, so to recompense the districts. So we got an extra 1.3 million, which was welcome but not enough. And as along with the settlement as well, the government announced the SEND to basically cover 90% of the deficits up to March 22 on the high needs stability grant. And in terms of precept flexibility, 7 areas were granted precept flexibility. They were Bournemouth, Poole and Christchurch, Warrington, Trafford, Windsor and Maidenhead, Worcestershire, Shropshire and North Somerset. And obviously in terms of having conversation, I'm having regular conversations with MHCLG, had one yesterday, having weekly calls in terms of that. And their view of the situation from the settlement is we take the flexibility of council tax. And we've got our capitalisation directive from the government yesterday of £59.9 million. So that's up to we can borrow capital for revenue purposes. In terms of moving forward onto the SEND statutory override, as I said earlier, that's welcome news in terms of that. So that phase 1 will be in 25-26 at the end of the year. We will be the government will give us 90% later on in that year in terms of covering that effectively the statutory override, and in terms of high need stability grants, so we'll get a huge amount of money of that, which is really welcome in terms of that. But phase 2, there's still unknown what the government are going to do in 26-27 and 27-28. I'm assuming that they will cover the same areas for 90%. The government announced a SEND white paper yesterday, so we're still working through the detail in terms of that. So, but that is welcome news in terms of covering the deficit, because obviously everyone's well aware that that is a huge cost to the county council in terms of our budget setting. If members turn to when we've had the final settlement, and it's paragraph 72 in the report, I think it's very clear for the core spending power that Worcestershire receives. So we've had a little extra money for this year, not as much as we normally got from the previous settlement. So we used to get about £11 million a year. We've got around 6.3, and some of that is through a sort of children's services prevention grant that's got to be spent for a specific purpose. So when you knock that down, it's around 4 million extra. So nowhere near enough to make sure that we can cover our costs going forward. But when you actually look in 27-28 and 28-29 from the government to meet our pressures, we're getting £700,000 and £500,000, £500,000 in 28-29. So that is nowhere near to cover the pressures that we have in adults, children's and areas around that. So the settlement is disappointing. There's been a huge amount of winners and losers. So we've got a positive, but a number of county councils have got negative areas in terms of that as well. So when you see the next 3 years, it's welcome to have a 3-year funding settlement, but it's not enough to meet the pressures that we've got on a day-to-day basis in terms of that. So that's where we are in terms of moving that forward. But they're the main areas in terms of the council tax. And then finally, about how challenging the next 3 years will be. So in terms of the in the report, you've assuming that council agree the 8.98 council tax, and we've got the flexibility, we'll still have huge budget gaps in the next 3 years. So we have to work at pace. The organisation has to get back to a stability where income meets expenditure. So we need to transform, we have to look at our capital programme, we have to transform, we'll have to be an organisation that employs less staff and does less things, because we have to get back to cutting our cloth accordingly. That's going to be a challenge, but we have to do that in terms of that. So that was just what I just wanted to update members in terms of what happened in the final settlement in terms of that. But pleasing to say, what the papers you've got in front of you at the moment today, the council can set a legal budget. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Phil. Yes, so you've just heard from the Section 151 officer on his Section 25 report and commentary on our budget paper. As has been reported consistently and regularly throughout the financial year, Worcestershire County Council is in a financial distress. A combination of successive governments failed to fund local services sufficiently, coupled with local decisions, really has driven us to the brink. Everything in this report has previously been approved by Cabinet and full Council, save for the really big issue on everyone's mind, the council tax increase. It really is with a heavy heart that we are recommending an increase of 8.98%, and I know that each of my Cabinet colleagues feel exactly the same way. But this is a culmination of irresponsible financial management by the previous administration over a number of years, by deliberately keeping council tax low despite having structural deficits in the budgets, which could only be filled by plundering reserves and applying for exceptional financial support from the government. Even as recently as last year, the previous administration chose to use £15 million of reserves to plug the back hole, a figure incidentally almost identical to the £14.5 million an extra 4% on council tax yields. This is the choice that they could and indeed should have made last year, but they didn't. They have created this situation by making choices based on political expediency and not sound financial management. Let me be clear, it is them to blame for the position we find ourselves in. The pressures on the 26-27 budget are enormous. Paragraph 88 identifies a recurring pressure of £109.86 million, and it's for this reason we have to reluctantly make this decision, and it is reluctantly. If there was any other decision we could make, believe me, we would be making it. To finish on a positive note, and as you've just heard from Phil, after the announcement yesterday on our application for EFS, we are now in a position to set a credible and legal budget for 26-27. Finally, after years of poor financial management, external independent criticism, including from the statutory auditors, this administration is getting on with the job of transforming services and restoring financial stability and ensuring that council taxpayers of Worcestershire have a well-run and financially responsible council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wharton. I think you've said everybody who belongs in this Cabinet and who is sitting in this Cabinet, the words that we have discovered and said and stated week after week, that, you know, we don't want to be in this position. We do not want to raise council tax. We're all council taxpayers ourselves. We have to do it to get ourselves out of that mess. Okay, have we got any Cabinet members that wish to speak at the moment? No? Okay. Councillors? Yeah, Councillor Kent.
Thank you. It's quite interesting in terms of just having heard what Councillor Wharton's just said in terms of referring to the 15 million. I think we borrowed something, we allocated something like 34 million of EFS, I think, exactly, and then invested 30 million of that into SEND effectively to try and alleviate the issues that we were seeing coming forward. So you've picked one part of it. But let's be honest, since May, you've had an opportunity to bring in huge reform. I mean, you stood on a basis of cutting waste and reducing taxes. We've not seen any cuts in waste. I know you've now appointed a cabinet member for Doge, so I do hope that he's able to make some progress in finding some efficiencies. But in terms of reducing taxes, you've done the polar opposite. Now, I understand you're doing all sorts of deals to get the budget through, and on a parish council meeting last night in terms of trying to get it through, you said you believe that enough members will all abstain and you've done sufficient deals to get this through. Could you clarify what those deals are that you've done? Because I'd like to point out that if they're to do with the £21 million worth of expenditure in the amendments, when the Conservative group is trying to save £14.4 million, that's a £35 million pivot. So I do hope that the cost of getting this budget through isn't going to be that this council is burdened with £21 million worth of capital that has been apportioned for pet projects that could probably be returned to the taxpayer.
I think just to clarify on that meeting last night, I said we were fairly certain, but not 100% certain we had the numbers to get through. I also did refer to a deal and then immediately corrected myself because doing a deal looks awful. It's not about doing deals. But in terms of the crux of your question, the amendments that we're working through with the Liberal Democrats at the moment do not incur any additional cost on the council taxpayer of Worcestershire in terms of the fact that they're capital expenditure, not revenue. So it's not going to reduce council tax if we say if we refuse to go with those amendments.
Thank you, Councillor Wharton. I think Hazel Best would like to step in and say a few words.
apologies, I should have said this at the beginning. So just to point out to councillors that in the report that was originally published, at paragraphs 184 and 185, there is a table which sets out the various bands for the council tax, assuming either 8.98% increase and then the one for 4.99. In the report as originally published, the column for band G was hidden. So the published report had bands A, B, C, D, E, F and H. We have updated that to also add in the column to say what would be for band G. And that amount, just to be clear, for 8.98% would be £2,934.67, and if it was a 4.99% increase, at £2,827.22. What we'll make sure we do is when we publish the minutes of this meeting, that is published alongside to make sure everyone is aware of that. So that omission isn't materially affecting the recommendations that that Cabinet is making today, but just for transparency, I should point that out.
Thank you for your clarification, Hazel. Do we have any more questions or any comments? Councillor Allen. I do apologise for getting your name wrong earlier.
No problem. I'm the better looking one of the two. I don't think he'd agree, but I definitely am. Good morning, Council. Lovely to see so many people here, obviously wanting to represent their constituents. If we could just look, I'm looking for a bit of clarification. If we look at page 66, which is the Appendix 2, I think. Let me just check. Yes, Appendix 2, page 66, with the second page of that appendix. About the 14th up from the bottom of the first table, which is Worcester to Kemsey ATC, and it's showing £430,000, if I read it correctly. And what I would like to know is, has that money been spent? And if it's been spent, what has it been spent on? If it hasn't been spent, what is it going to be spent on and when? Or are we going to keep it or absorb it into something else? I'm a bit sort of mystified, so I'm just looking for a bit of clarification, please, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Can I ask Phil Rook to clarify that?
Okay. Rachel might be able to help. I did ask her before the meeting because I was looking for clarification, not just to make a political point.
Okay, Rachel Hill, please.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. It's 43,000 rather than 430, unfortunately. It relates to the puffin crossing that was installed along the A38 by the community centre in Kempsey. The works were finalised last December with some tree planting, I think, still to be done. And the source of the funding is Section 106 monies.
It's been spent.
Yeah.
Thank you. That answers your question, yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Do we have anyone else that would like to speak? No, just looking around. Councillor Birch.
Thank you very much, Leader. Point of clarification, really, from Phil. Of course, it'd be remiss of me, as we're in Whichehaven's council chamber, to not mention the council tax freeze that Whichehaven will be voting on tomorrow, thanks to their good governance, and of course our partner council, Malvern Hills, will be doing similar. But Phil, from point of clarification for me, and I know we've spoken about it before, prior to COVID, this council consistently produced balanced budgets with one of the lowest council tax rates within the country, similar to Whichehaven District Council. The demand has, of course, spiralled since the COVID pandemic, and that is at a national level, that is across Europe, that is across the world in various different areas. And actually what we've seen then is those demand-driven costs spiral out of control, which have contributed significantly to that considerable rise in debt that we have seen since the COVID pandemic. Are you able to just clarify for me that I've got that right? This is very much a case of prior to COVID, it's not decades of mismanagement. These are demand-led costs that have spiraled considerably within the last couple of years, as opposed to over decades and successive administrations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I can confirm, obviously, we did a resilience review for the Audit and Governance Committee, so that went back 4 or 5 years, and it's post-COVID. So if you think about previously to COVID, the council was either slightly overspending or slightly underspending year on year. I think since COVID, the demands, particularly on adults, children and homeschool transport, have rocketed in terms of that. And it's not just the numbers, it's we had the war in the Ukraine, members recall about that in terms of putting prices up. And then obviously last year, particularly, the government introduced legislation to increase national insurance and national living wage, which particularly impacted on adult services around that. And obviously we couldn't afford that. So the government gave us a grant to confirm for our own staff, but not for others. So there has been particularly underfunding of particularly adults, children's and homeschool transport. Pleasingly enough, homeschool transport, Rachel and the team have done some really good work, so they're underspent this year in terms of that, so that's pleasing, but adults and children have not been funded appropriately, and you can see through when I said earlier on the core spending power that the council receives. So if you look at 27, 28, 29, 700,000, 500,000, they're not funding adults and children's correctly, so your statement is correct.
Thank you, Phil, for that. I think you're absolutely correct on the figures there, and you can't avoid the facts on that one. Councillor Bowen?
Thank you, Chair. It's an interesting question from Councillor Birch. I've got a lot of time for him. And it is true that a lot of the additional costs that we've incurred are following the extra demand. However, as I talked about earlier, there were structural problems, or there are structural problems which we are having to fix, which came about because of Conservative decisions. I talked about the numbers of children that we used to look after in-house and how the care of children got subcontracted out to private companies. Now, those 80 additional children that are looked after in residential care now than was the case 5 years ago, that equates to, based on average care costs today, more than £25 million. So actually, if the Conservatives had prioritised looking after the services that we had and had prioritised building our foster carer base, making sure that we could look after all the children that we have a statutory duty to look after, then we would not be in the mess we're in. So while they can say, you know, it's not entirely their fault, and that is true, their failure to take responsibility for the mistakes they made is, frankly, a disgrace, and they should be ashamed of themselves.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. I know you've got a lot of passion in this subject. Thank you very much. Anybody else wish to add? Councillor Miller, I'm sorry, I did not forget you. Thank you very much.
No, I knew you wouldn't.
No, I know.
Yeah, what I am not mystified, because I think I probably know what went on. When we went into special measures with our children and cared for, we were not in control of that budget. We were under direction of what we had to do and what we had to spend. And the spend throughout that period was phenomenal. And it was a big impact, which was officer-led because they had to comply. Now, with that, did we have a choice in what we were doing there? No, we didn't. And in-house services, it's been referenced to in-house services. Where would the extra demand since 2020 within Worcestershire, where would those in-house services been provided for, and where would the staff to run those in-house services be provided for? Is this the reason why we had to go outside of Worcestershire for care? And was the percentage of extra children and elderly people that needed to be cared for accounted for within this calculation? And is it being, it probably is being looked at for the next 5 years, but the increase in elderly people in the next 5 years, how is that referenced within the budget that we are proposing now? And will it be sufficient for the demand that will be led by the care of elderly people?
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Before I pass it on to our Cabinet member, I'd just like to add, I never believe that it's always officer-led, because we have to have a combination of both members and officers, because us as members cannot run the place on our own without the people doing the work in the background. Let's forward on to Councillor Bowen.
Thank you. And thank you, Councillor Miller, for his question. A few different questions in there. In terms of where children in residential care should be being looked after, you will always have some. There will always be a proportion who will need to be looked after in residential homes. And as Worcestershire doesn't have any residential homes as a result of previous policy, then there will always be some who have to be looked after in those privately run homes. The big issue, and I'm actually going to give the Conservatives one little bit of credit. They actually came up with an idea called specialist foster carers, which was on the right track, but they never actually did anything with it. A big proportion of children in residential care, children's residential homes, could be looked after in foster homes with the right package of support. Now, having come up with an idea to meet that demand, the Conservatives did nothing with it. So that was their first mistake. But in order to have that middle tier of therapeutic foster homes, you've actually got to have foster carers in the first place. And when you sit over, because of policy, a decline in the number of foster carers that the Conservatives did, and I've already talked about, we went from 193 children in 2020 down to 113 in 2025, you've got nowhere else to go. So you're left with nothing. So children have to go to private, whether that's private children's homes or independent fostering agencies. Either which way, it's been subcontracted out to private companies. And they charge us now tens of millions of pounds for the privilege of doing so. So I'll give you a little bit of credit for coming up with a possible solution, but you did nothing with it.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. I'm going to invite our Chief Executive, Paul Robinson.
It's just on Councillor Miller's point about forward projections for the budget in terms of adult social care. There's two big things in adult social care around. Yes, of course, people think about older people, but of course, a significant portion of our spend is around adults of working age with disabilities. And that is an area where both, very similar to children's, where both complexity, length of time that we are caring for people, and the costs of those levels of care have escalated dramatically. So it's not just purely about the numbers of old people that are projected through the demographic growth. And we do it each year, and you will have seen this each year, as certainly will your colleagues who were on Cabinet. We bring from the directorates a growth figure into the budget conversations, and certainly our colleagues in Reform will have seen that this year, where the demographics, the cost trends, the numbers that we currently have in place, and anything that we've got sight of in terms of coming downstream is put into what is known as a growth figure, effectively, for what we think the budget will need to increase by the following year in order to do that. And that's obviously netted off against efficiency and any potential savings of renegotiations of contracts, etc., that we can do to try and balance that growth figure out. So yes, the budget does include it. The medium-term financial plan also includes an estimate of what we believe that growth figure will be. But budget setting is and it's the point I just wanted to raise, is budget setting is not done by the officers, it is done by members. It is members that ultimately make the decision. And if you look at the growth figures that have been included in the budgets over many years, they're not necessarily just purely what the Directorate have asked for. And so there is choice and there is prioritisation within that. So yes, it's in the budget just as it's been in the previous years, but the growth figure is an estimate for what we believe will come through, taking into account things like demographics. In other areas of work, it might be the number of houses that are being built, or the number of new metres of road that are being created, etc., that we will also need to think about what we have to maintain and the costs, etc. But it is all built into the medium-term financial plan. Oh, I think Phil wanted to.
Okay.
Councillor
Phil,
Miller, I'm just going to answer your question about Worcestershire Children's First and the company. So obviously members will all be aware that we were directed by the Secretary of State to create a company, Worcester Children's First. I think the council supported that really well. We got back to good. And I think in the first 2 years of operation, obviously I was the Director of Resources at that company, we were underspending on children's services by £500,000 a year around that. And it only became when COVID impacted that those pressures on, and Adam's in the back there, the pressures that come on, it's basically they looked after children's budget. Every other area was on budget. It's just we live or die on the budget, on the placements. And I've spoken earlier around the war in the Ukraine, the impact, and Josh McAllister, the review that articulated there should be additional funding for children's social care. That has not materialised by either government, if I'm being honest, in terms of that. So children's services is still under a huge amount of pressures. I sit on the Market Intervention Advisory Group for the County Council Network and SCT that we're trying to fix this problem around cost, because it's the cost of care that's increasing. So I think it's just worth to say on record that the council did support Worcester Children's First. We got back to good, which is the amazing work from all the social workers to get back to that, which is really good, and the services have come back in-house, which is the right thing to do. So it's just that context around that we were living within the means prior to COVID in terms of that. So it's just to get a balanced view. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Phil. Have we got any more people that wish to speak or ask a question? No? Okay. I've put it forward to Councillor Wharton to move this proposal, and do we all agree on this?
Yeah, I've already moved it, just to say,
Yeah.
obviously remind members that there's...
I didn't know if you wanted to sum up, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, there's an additional scrutiny meeting tomorrow morning where members will be able to ask questions, and then obviously waiting for the big event on Thursday.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a long day on Thursday, and I think we're going to be robustly debating this. Rightly so, actually. But, when you come into this after a few months, I think with any business, if you take on a business that's suffering, and this is a kind of business, I think when you take on all that debt, you've got to do something and cut things to make things work. Okay, if there's no one else wishing to speak, I think we'll ask the Cabinet if you all agree. Agreed? Okay, that's agreed. Thank you very much. Okay, that concludes our business of Cabinet today, unless there's anything else. I don't believe there is. Thank you, everyone, and look forward to seeing everybody on at full council later on this week. Thank you.